Hey, it's Diana again. Welcome back to another installment of Woman Once Removed, my life story. And tonight we're going to have just a little shade. I'm going to use this fan because I don't have any air conditioning in this room and it's already kind of warm, so I can give you his full name, Albert Richard Brewer, because he never remarried after we married. He's deceased and he had no children. He was the youngest in his family and they're all deceased. And so I can talk about him. He was murdered a few years ago over a drug deal. So that was the reason I divorced him, over his drug consumption. So let's just jump into this. I met him while I was living with a roommate of mine. Her name was Lynn. I've told the story about how I went with my roommate's boyfriend out to the clubs that I wound up meeting George, the guy that I was extremely in love with. And when George and I broke up, I started dating Al. Well, the thing about Al is he had fallen in love with me prior to George and I breaking up, and he confessed his love for me. Well, I never have been the type that would burn my candle at both ends. I tried to be loyal. If I was in love with somebody, I was extremely loyal. And so I couldn't date him then. But whenever George and I broke up, of course, I got on the phone and said, how you doing, you know, and we started seeing each other. And we dated a good while. At the time when I actually started dating him, I was living with Anastasia. Again, this was the second time. This is after she had abandoned me right before I had my surgery. So I had moved back in with her, and she was married, and I guess that's what prompted me to want to have a husband, was because she was married. A lot of our other friends were already married, and I had already had surgery, and of course I wanted to be a Sadie. So I contacted Al, and we started dating. And pretty soon after I started dating him, I moved in with Scarlett Lefevre. And that's where I was living during most of the part of our relationship. And so I really didn't know a lot of things about him that he was into, like drinking too much and doing drugs, you know. We would date, he would bring me home, and then he'd go off in his 1964 candy apple red convertible Corvette, and he'd go do his thing, and that had to do with drinking too much and doing drugs. And I didn't know about all that until after we were married. And that actually caused us to not actually stay married, but for 2 months. So I could have, I guess, had that annulled, because we weren't really together as husband and wife very long. But I tried to work it out, but it was over drugs is the reason we separated, and alcohol. What happened was, my parents were coming to have a Sunday dinner with us. Dinner in the South is lunch. So we were having actually lunch, and I had went to a lot of trouble because my mom and daddy were coming. The first time they were coming to eat with me and my husband. So he decided at the last minute he was going fishing with his friends. And of course I was upset about that. But he promised me, he says, I'm going to come back early and we're going to go over to Pedro's, which was the oldest and the biggest Mexican restaurant in Charlotte. And we love to go there. And so I said, okay. He said, be ready. I'll be home by 6 o'clock. So I had a nice lunch with my parents, and then they left, and then I got myself dressed up to go out to eat at Pedro's. Well, 6 o'clock came and went, 7, 8, 9, 10. He never showed up. By that time, and back in those days, you know, when I wore dresses, I wore these full slips, and I had done taken off my dress, and I had done went through that being mad stage, and then being upset stage, and crying, and all that. So by the time he rolled around at 3 o'clock in the morning, I done got back to being mad. And so all I had on was my slip. And he came in the door. I flew a full fit on him. And I made the mistake of slapping him and him drunk. He literally tried to kill me. He had a broom that was like an industrial kind of broom with a big, huge handle. He took that thing and swiped it all through the kitchen, all the things on shelves, the collectible things that I had everywhere in my kitchen. He broke everything. And then he said, I'm going to kill you. So I run out the front door. We were living in a duplex that was built like a brick house. It was on a hill, and so it had a full basement underneath it. And it had been raining. So I went to run around that yard. The people that lived in the duplex next door had moved out, so there wasn't anybody there. I was screaming and hollering. I kept thinking to myself, I just can't believe this is going on. While it was happening, because this kind of stuff had never went on in my family. It was like, I'm thinking, this is gutter trash to be doing this. But here I am, this man is behind me with this broom in his hand, saying, I'm going to kill you. When I went to go around the side of the house, it had a hill there, and the grass was wet, and I fell down that hill. And when I turned around, there he was above me with that thing in his hand and was fixing to hit me with it. And I said, ow, there's somebody behind you. I bluffed him. And I got up, and somehow I pushed him down because he was drinking. So the grass made him slip, and I got in the house. Well, he come in behind me. I had then got to the bedroom and had locked the door. But it was those hollow kind of doors. He went to beating the door down with that broom. He was literally beating holes in the door. Saying, when I get in there, I'm killing you. He had made the mistake, right after we got married, buying me a pistol, saying that if somebody come in on me or something, I could protect myself. So I took that pistol and I shot it into the closet, not into the door. I didn't want to kill the man because I was smart enough to know I didn't want to go to jail. I wasn't drinking or doing drugs. I knew what would happen if I killed the man. So I shot into the closet. Oh, well, it wasn't but a second that I heard that Corvette start up, and he got out of there. So, we separated after that, and we never went back together. Because I didn't want that kind of, what I call a trashy dog's life. So, he wound up being murdered because of drugs just a few years ago. And the funny thing about that was, and if somebody being murdered is not funny, but I had this feeling that I needed to check on him. This was a few years ago. So I did a search online just to see if I could, see if anything about him, and saw his obituary. He had died the week before. So I was having some kind of ESP thing from the other side, I'm guessing. So I checked on him and found out he was dead, and I was just, not that I was devastated over any kind of emotional thing for him, but I hated anybody to go that way. He was killed by a neighbor who had come and done drugs with him and knew that he had the drugs and came back to get him and had to kill him to get him. He confessed to the police. So, that's number one. I'm glad I got out of there before I was one of those to die. And he was from an upper crust family. His father was the head of the public housing department for the city of Charlotte. All his brothers and sisters were all professionals. And he was a drunk. So, that's my story about Al. I make it short and sweet. It didn't last very long. So, it was a rebounds marriage anyway. I would have never married him if I hadn't have been heartbroken over George. That was my shade for tonight. Bye-bye, y'all.